Welcome back to Emotional Edge, where every story reaches deep into the heart. Today we follow Daniel Cross, a haunted veteran, and his loyal dog Ivy, who move into an abandoned desert observatory rumored to be cursed. But when Ivy begins scratching at a silent stone wall under the burning Arizona sun, what they uncover will challenge everything he thought he knew about guilt, redemption, and the strange living heartbeat of the earth itself. Stay until the end, because the truth beneath the mesa will leave you breathless. Thank you for watching this story on Emotional Edge, where every tale reminds us that kindness, courage, and loyalty still matter. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us keep sharing heartfelt stories that bring warmth, hope, and humanity back into our world. From all of us here, and from every loyal dog and quiet hero we honor, thank you for being part of our family. Thank you for being here with us. And now, let's continue our story. Daniel Cross arrived in Solace Ridge beneath a white-hot noon sun, the kind that makes color feel louder and the horizon seem close enough to touch. He parked his dusty pickup at the base of Eagle's Watch Observatory and stood for a long beat, palms on warm stone, letting the day's heat soak into his bones like proof that life could still be solid. After years sealed inside windowless rooms, guiding unmanned aircraft by screens and coordinates, he had come for exactly this. Fixable things, bolts that either turned or didn't, boards that either held or gave, problems that yielded to hands and daylight. Locals had called him brave or foolish depending on the coffee they drank. A few laughed when he signed for the derelict dome on the mesa, repeating the old nickname, the Cursed Eye. But he just smiled and scratched Ivy's neck. Ivy, a sable German shepherd with amber watchful eyes, took 2 surveying loops and then trotted straight for the observatory's side entrance, nose low, tail leveled, posture focused in a way Daniel recognized from the field. Inside, dust floated in clear shafts of noon light, map drawers stuck halfway open, and the brass skeleton of a great telescope slumbered beneath canvas. Every step echoed, clean and empty. Daniel rolled his sleeves, opened windows, and set a folding cot in the old library. By early afternoon, he had swept a path to the basement stairs where air grew cooler and smelled faintly of vinegar and silver salts. Ivy's nails ticked on concrete as she guided him to a heavy wooden door stenciled dark room. Beyond it, a cramped chamber waited, its stone wall chalky and sun-warmed even this far below. Ivy pressed her nose to the center seam and breathed, then looked back, asking without a sound for Daniel to understand. He knocked the stones. The sound came back dull and solid. Nothing to hear. Nothing yet. Above them, the Arizona day ran bright and tireless, filling every crack with light, as if daring secrets to stay hidden. And Daniel, who had once lived by coordinates alone, felt the stubborn pull of a new map forming inside him. A grid laid not on satellite images, but on heat, rock, and the trustworthy insistence of a dog that clearly believed the wall was lying. By midday the next day, the observatory had a different voice, less silence, and more low vibration. A steady, almost musical thrum that seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the mesa itself were humming under the honest blaze of the sun. When Daniel set his battered transistor radio on the oak desk and spun the dial, a clear weather report snapped into focus before exploding into ragged static that tore at the room like a sheet ripped in two. The sound was too familiar. It threaded through muscle memory toward places he had promised himself he would not revisit. The places where lives changed at the push of a button. He clicked the radio off and marched himself into daylight, taking the truck down to the diner where the day glared off windshields and shadow hid beneath awnings. Jed Matthews, who poured coffee as if it were a civic duty, squinted at Daniel's sunburnt cheeks and said, "You're the fellow who bought the dome, Eagle's Watch. You hearing it yet?" When Daniel asked, Jed tapped the counter with a knuckle. "Ground sings up there. Dr. Elias Monroe said so, for he left. Claimed it messed with his instruments, said the earth had a note. Back on the mesa, the afternoon light carved clean lines across the floorboards, The hum was present but not menacing, like a generator 2 rooms away. Daniel placed his laptop in the window's bright rectangle to charge, and it drained faster than it filled. The radio, when he tried again, fell to static after minutes. Ivy paced, ears flicking, then settled with her head on her paws, facing that same section of basement wall as if it were a door no one else could see. Daniel's instinct argued for loose pipes or old wiring, the practical explanations he preferred, but the pattern, day-bright interference, and a dog's unshakable attention wasn't random. He wrote the symptoms on a yellow pad in neat block letters, the way he had learned to manage panic. Hum, constant; static, intermittent; battery drain, rapid; ivy interest, consistent. Outside, the sunlight refused to soften, and every cactus spine threw a precise shadow. If the day was going to conceal something, it would have to work much harder. Daniel underlined ivy and circled hum, then lifted his eyes to the bright ceiling and decided that whatever this was, it would be solved in the open, not in the dark. The third day began with clean light and a list. Daniel attacked the director's office the way a medic clears a corridor, sorting by use and weight, stacking ledger books on the wide sill where they warmed under the glass until the glue sighed and gave. Beneath a crumbling atlas and a sheaf of star charts, he found a narrow leather field book marked E. Monroe 62. Its elastic snapped, but its pages crisp and dappled with sun. He stood in the bright rectangle by the window and read, "Terrestrial resonance present even during solar calm. Radio interference correlates with readings at lower frequencies. Suspect piezoelectric interaction within local strata." The handwriting was precise and certain, the language cool, yet here and there a human sentence broke through like a creek crossing a road, voice without words, as if the floorboards remember, cannot sleep for the base of it. Daniel felt the curious comfort of inheriting a problem from someone competent, and the live wire prickle of being in over his head at the same time. He spread survey maps across the desk, letting them flatten beneath a brass bookend shaped like a sun. Daylight laid grid lines on grid lines as he traced fault lines with a carpenter's pencil. Ivy nosed the lower shelves and then, bored, loped out to the veranda to stretch in the heat, her chest rising slow, her ears still swiveled toward the basement as if distance did not dilute meaning. In the notebook's later pages, Monroe's voice tilted toward urgency. Anomalous energy persists even with all equipment powered down. Interference remains strongest along northern base seam. Have requested additional core samples. Must learn if charges aggregate under stress. Daniel closed the book and stared into the noon glare. He thought of capacitors and quartz lighters and the faint electric sting a storm leaves on skin. He thought of the way sound can occupy a ribcage without asking permission. On the yellow pad he added Monroe, piezoelectric, and drew a line to hum. When he looked up, the day stood there, bright and implacable, the kind that forgives nothing but rewards everything, and he felt the first clean click of an answer sliding into a lock he had not known he was holding. By early afternoon, the heat shimmered above the mesa in visible waves, and Daniel, determined to rule out bad contacts, set up the old shortwave on the workbench by a sunlit window where the light fell like a square of pale fire. He soldered a joint with the careful patience he gave to tasks that kept his mind steady. The hum rode along the edges of the day, present but not loud, until the radio lunged from silence into a scream of static so violent it felt like grit in his teeth. His hands flinched, the tweezers snapped, the contact skittered across the bench and vanished into dust. For a second, the room changed shape. The brightness twisted into the cold geometry of another place, and breath narrowed to a narrowed straw. The bone-deep drone of server racks he had not heard in years climbed out of memory as if it were just outside the door. Ivy was on him before panic found words, pressing her weight into his shins, then his chest as he slid to the floor, her paws a steady drum on his ribs, her tongue insistent as if she were literally trying to pull him back into the same daylight she occupied. He grabbed her collar and felt the damp warmth of her breath, the clean animal smell of sun on fur. The little burr caught near her ear, all of it sensory proof that the only room that mattered was the one full of noon and dust, and a very real dog refusing to let the day go anywhere without him. When the static died, the hum remained like a bass note after a chord fades, and Daniel lay there counting heartbeats until counting became breathing, and breathing became ordinary. He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand, sat up into the square of light, and said aloud, "Okay." The word made a promise to the version of himself that had crawled up out of night rooms and headset pressure to stand here now in honest heat. He cleaned the bench, labeled the broken part, and wrote on his pad, "Trigger threat. Solve cause." The glare outside made the sky look almost white, and he welcomed its severity. Nothing hides easily at noon. Ivy thumped her tail once, satisfied, and lay with her chin on his boot, eyes open, listening to the same hum, but hearing something less dangerous in it now that he had decided to answer it with daylight and work. If the hum was a question, the day itself would be the method. Daniel took the maps onto the veranda, where the sun lit their creases and the breeze rifled pages like a curious librarian. He overlaid the old county geology with newer digital printouts he had fetched at the public library, aligning the mesa's long spine to satellite images until roads, ridgelines, and fences agreed. The northern edge of the observatory base, exactly where Ivy liked to sniff the foundation seam, sat atop a dense swath of quartz-bearing rock. He colored the band with a pencil, then cross-checked faults and historical surveys. The physics crouched at the edges of his memory, but the gist was clear. Quartz deforms under stress and answers by making electricity. An entire mesa flexing on subtle shifts would mean a silent engine big as landscape. He tested the idea with a little field experiment as the sun scalded the gravel to white. Battery packs drained fastest when set on the stone step by the northern seam. A small AM radio yielded a cleaner signal in the shade of the southern wall and dissolved into noise when he walked it back to the north. Ivy, for her part, panted contentedly in the brightness, then stood and pawed at a hairline crack by the foundation like a prospector who recognizes the glint. By early afternoon, the equation felt honest. No ghosts, no curses, just crystalline order, under pressure, translating earth movement into charge, and charge into a hum that resonated through wood and bone. He wrote it cleanly on the pad. Piezoelectric mesa. Hum plus interference. N edge strongest. He did not need the science to heal him, but the science gave him language. It took something amorphous and named it, and that naming softened the edges of memory that tried to turn every machine noise into danger. The light moved across the veranda in a bright trapezoid, and Daniel moved with it, marking where the field was strongest, building a simple map that might have made Dr. Monroe smile in recognition. When he told Ivy, "It's the mountain talking," she blinked once, as if to say she had understood that hours ago, and touched her nose to the seam again, already thinking, if a dog can think, about the other thing, the inside wall she had not forgiven. Armed with an explanation for the hum and the clean confidence daylight lends to hard work, Daniel carried Monroe's rolled blueprints downstairs and unscrolled them on the basement counter where a sunbeam fell like a ruler. The plan from 1955 measured the darkroom at 18 feet along the north-south axis. He hooked a tape measure at the jamb and walked it to the stone wall while motes of dust glittered like confetti in noon light. 14 feet, no matter how many times he checked, which meant the room was smaller inside than it was supposed to be. Ivy, who never turned down confirmation, pressed her nose to the center seam as if to stamp the measurement with a paw print. Daniel knocked, listening for hollows, but the reply was stubbornly solid. Rock, mortar, intent. He sketched the discrepancy on the pad and, after a sandwich eaten in the bright doorway, fetched a chisel and a sledge. The work was loud and clean, the kind of noise that belongs to daytime. Steel ringing, stone cracking, the air rich with a sunlit grit that tasted like effort. He broke for water often, letting his pulse come down while he stood in the square of light at the bottom of the stairs, where heat and cool met like a handshake. Late on the second day, The chisel punched through with a soft sigh of pressure and a breath of air that smelled like old paper and rocks sleeping, dry, forgotten daytime that had been waiting in the dark for half a century. He widened the hole, slid through with his lantern held high, even though the bright rectangle from the stairwell reached a surprising distance into the hidden chamber, and found a small room that daylight entered like a curious guest. Shelves with labeled core samples, instruments with big dials and honest knobs, a wooden desk furred with dust so fine it looked like frost in the beam. On the desk sat a reel-to-reel recorder threaded and ready, a Geiger counter whose needle rested just above zero, and a thick leather journal. Ivy squeezed in behind him, sneezed at the dust, then settled with the calm satisfaction of an animal whose hunch has finally gotten the applause it deserved. Daniel set the lantern down, though the day still did most of the work, opened the journal, and read the first neat line. June 1963, continuing study of the Mesa's song. He read in the bright spill from the stairwell until the words felt warm to the touch. Dr. Elias Monroe chronicled the piezoelectric field with clear-eyed rigor, measurements, hypotheses, corrections, and then, entry by entry, slid into a human problem no formula could solve. Rare earth trace elements confirmed within quartz matrix, one page declared. Primary deposit extends under reservation boundary, the next confessed. The tone shifted from curiosity to conscience. What to do with a discovery that would draw drills like flies to sugar and carve roads across sacred ground? A week later, the writing grew tight and quick. Visits from Helion Industries representatives who said, progress, the way a storm says, inevitable, offers that felt like commands, a veiled threat that sounded less veiled the second time. Daniel played the brittle tape, and even in daylight the thin corporate voice raised heat along his neck. Not a villain from the old days, but a cooler, modern variant speaking opportunity and efficiency while implying ruin. There were pages devoted to core samples and pages that read like prayers. Then one final line that tied the scientific to the sacred. A note about meeting an elder who told a private family version of the Seven Sisters story and asked that the earth be left to sing its own song. I must hide the light for fear it burns what I love, Monroe wrote, and the sentence sat there in noon brightness with the kind of honesty that does not dim. Daniel felt that sentence in his chest because he knew what it cost to carry secrets meant to protect people who would never know your name. He thought of the hum transformed from threat to comprehension. He thought of the hidden chamber transformed from puzzle to testimony. Outside, the day kept its pace, untroubled by human dilemmas, and through the doorway, light pooled across the floorboards of a room that had not seen sun since Lyndon Johnson. He closed the journal, rested his hand on the cover, and said to Ivy, "This isn't just ours." She thumped her tail once as if to add, "It never was." Then he did the most difficult, ordinary thing. He climbed into the sharp noon, took a breath full of heat and dust and clarity, and decided to share what he had found with the people to whom the ground itself belonged. The sun was high when Daniel parked outside the Yavapai Cultural Office, the kind of high that bleaches colour from pickup hoods and draws hard lines under eaves. He carried a duffel with the journal, copies of maps, and the digitised tape, and he walked in the measured way of someone determined not to rush what shouldn't be rushed. Lena Ortiz greeted him with professional courtesy that felt like shade, cool, careful, necessary. And Elder Jonah sat beside her, hands folded, eyes bright as creek stones in daylight. Daniel told the story in a single stream designed for noon. Nothing hidden, nothing embellished. The Mesa hum, the interference, Ivy's insistence, the blueprint discrepancy, the sealed room, the journal, the tape. Skepticism is sensible at noon too, and he met it head-on by laying each artifact on the table, explaining how each had waited in the bright, ordinary world to be noticed. When he read the line about the family's private version of the Seven Sisters, Jonah's posture shifted from guarded to listening. When the tape's thin threat filled the well-lit room, Lena's jaw set with a resolve that matched the hardness of the sun outside. They did not decide instantly. Daylight doesn't force. But they asked for copies and time and proposed that if they moved, they would move together. Daniel felt relief like cool water behind his sternum, not because he could offload a burden, but because the story had finally found its proper daylight. In weeks that ran bright and busy, the three of them built a case. Evidence authenticated, surveys verified by an independent geologist who liked to do field checks at noon, tape digitized and cleaned until every corporate euphemism glinted in the sun. Their first outreach to Helion Industries was a letter composed as precisely as a survey line. Factual, calm, inviting a meeting. The reply came faster than Pride would have liked. Fear of headlines works best in daylight, and soon a conference room 30 floors up hosted a conversation that, at its core, belonged to the ground and the sun. Daniel wore his cleanest work shirt and didn't apologize for calluses. Lena presented facts like plumb lines. Jonah watched in silence until it was time to speak. When it was, he said one sentence that hung like a bell in the bright room. Our children will need the sky you tried to buy. Helion could read the sun as well as anyone. They saw the angles of bad press and the sturdier angles of repair, and after days of negotiating that took place in offices so bright they seemed designed to banish shadows, a path formed that resembled justice. Return of disputed land to the Yavapai Nation, a fund to compensate for opportunity siphoned away, and an endowment dedicated to restoring Eagle's Watch as a place where science and story met in honest daylight. Months later, under a sky so blue it seemed to ring, crews in high-visibility vests polished the dome until it flashed like a coin tossed into the day. Electricians ran lines that respected the mesa's song, and carpenters repaired sun-split railings with wood that would weather handsomely in heat. Classrooms took shape where storage had sagged, and the library regained its appetite for fingers and eyes. The great telescope's bearings were cleaned until sunlight glowed on brass like honey. Daniel, who had arrived looking for solitude at noon, found himself teaching repair to kids who wore their hair half-tamed by wind. He showed them how a radio works when the earth wants to sing louder than the station, how to read lab notes without losing compassion, how to trust the weight of tools in warm palms. Lena built a curriculum with as much sky as math, and Jonah told stories out on the veranda where children squinted up into the blaze and learned to love a brightness that didn't blind. Ivy, muzzle greying, made her rounds like a benevolent sergeant, tolerating endless pats with a dignity that delighted everyone. The day of the Institute's opening, Daniel stood by the northern seam with a portable AM set and let students hear the hum as a voice that belonged to them, not as fear or mystery, but as place. He caught himself smiling in the particular way a person smiles when a thing that once hurt now simply exists. The mesa did not stop singing. Why would it? But the song nested inside a life rebuilt in the open, work that used daylight well, friendships that did not require translation, a story told where everyone could see it. When a student asked whose sky it was, Daniel pointed in a slow circle and said, "Ours." And the answer sounded correct in the bright air, practical and generous at the same time. In the end, Daniel learned that sometimes healing isn't found in silence or isolation, but in listening, to the earth, to the past, and to those who still believe in what's worth protecting. The hum beneath the mesa was never a curse, but a reminder that everything alive carries its own rhythm, a story waiting to be heard. If this journey touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Emotional Edge, where every story reminds us that even in the quietest places, there's always a voice calling us home.